Welcome to your next tech startup. I'm Isabel Rasmussen, host and founder of Proceso Talent. Today, I have a good friend of mine on, Elliot, and we are going to be discussing the AI space and how that's going to impact QA roles. So, Elliot, can you start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and your last role in an AI company?
Sure. Always a pleasure, Isabel. My name is Elliot Sequeira, as Isabel mentioned. I have pretty deep expertise in the Series A, B, and C startup space over the last 10 or 15 years. And most recently, the last startup I was hiring for was for an AI company that enabled large healthcare providers like Stanford and the Mayo Clinic to monetize their very sensitive data. What we learned from that startup was not only is the obvious, our very personal data needs to be secure, but the models running the data, which came from third-party researchers, needed to also be secure. So we had an interesting model where the model needed to be encrypted and not visible to the data, and the data needed to be encrypted and not visible to the model. So it was a pretty new burgeoning space 2 or 3 years ago.
Great, thank you. And when you came into that role, what was your title and were there QAs already on the team?
My title is Director of Quality Engineering. I
Mhm.
inherited two ICs, and they were mostly manual testers.
Okay. Thinking about the team and how you were going to be able to solve the problems the most effectively, what was your plan in regards to making your first hires?
Sure, the first plan at a startup is usually to understand what the natural QA process and the testing process unfolded, to understand the development process, hiring and product needs for all of the above
Mhm.
before figuring out. In this case, the strategy was to hire a fairly a technical mix in terms of technical abilities of a QA team. We needed some manual testers to help keep things going. We needed some Scrum team testers to help the product team get products into production quicker. And then we needed kind of a more technical set of testing folks, the software developers and test that worked within CI/CD and within kind of the developers' IDEs.
Okay, so if I get that straight, I feel like the sound got a little off. So you needed a couple of manual testers, then a couple of SDETs, and then did you say you needed automation testers?
I did not mention automation testers. Thanks for reminding me. Automation is an interesting skill where sort of even though we want manual testers, we want them to want the ability to do automated testing. And usually
Mhm.
the Scrum team testers do regression testing. So the QA automation kind of is involved into those three roles.
Okay, so the three roles being, I haven't heard of, you said Scrum testers?
Mhm. Typically,
Okay.
when you see a QA tester, depending on the job description, you can tell that they're focused on making sure a sprint gets done on time and that the products being developed within that sprint are of high quality.
Huh.
So
Okay. So you
that's
had,
great.
okay, so manual testers, Scrum testers, and then SDETs.
Correct.
Okay. And then so when you came into the role, you had QAs, so you needed the Scrum testers and the SDETs.
Yes, that's correct. I had manual testers and I need QAs.
Okay. And then as you noted, like this is a few years ago, so you couldn't just find 1,000 AI startups that already had QAs doing that work. What were kind of the things that you had to do to change how you searched for a QA in that role versus, a few years before?
Yeah, the number one thing that I looked for was the ability to learn a new platform and to learn a new technology quickly and be able to apply existing quality and testing skills to those new products and new technologies. So I would say that's probably the primary thing I was looking for.
When you were looking for this role, let's break it down. First is resumes. You are looking for people who are constantly learning and moving into new spaces through their career. So, give me an example of a resume that you would look at and pass on versus a resume that you would move that person to an interview.
Sure. So someone who's worked in banking and has worked at various financial institutions, for example, and has helped those institutions with new product lines, has less experience learning and building up a new platform than someone, for example, that's worked at Tesla, Stripe, or blockchain when those were new technologies. So, someone with that resume that says, blockchain, Tesla, um, and any other technology, let's just say some VR technology, kind of shows that they have some base set of abilities, but they can apply it in very different spaces. So that's sort of the resume I was looking for.
Okay, so someone who kind of their whole career has been in larger companies, more structure, you're passing on, and you're really focused on people who are working on technologies that are up and coming. So it's not just about like being at different startups or different interesting tech companies. It's more about working on something that's new in the space. Is that
Yes,
accurate?
yes, exactly. It's a very strong indicator that someone will be able to drop into this new AI healthcare privacy space and pick things up very quickly and be able to draw from their previous experience.
And then you've reviewed resumes, you're interviewing people now. What is one of the ways that you're testing for this person being able to be successful on a new platform, learning a lot of things up front?
Yeah, there's a Richard Branson adage where he says, you don't hire great people and then tell them what to do. So kind of what I'm looking for is someone that'll be a representative of the strategy I'm trying to roll out. So typically, one of the reasons, for example, I think you had a question on Scrum Team Tester earlier. One
Yeah.
of the reasons I have those roles very specifically delineated is because each of those roles have different internal, maybe an external customer. So the SDET, the customer I mentioned, is the IDE, it's the developer. The Scrum Team Tester has a very different mandate because they have to move fast and make very quick decisions without having time to do a detailed regression test and figure out the impact. And they need to be able to hand off the questions that they have or the concerns that they have to the regression testing team, typically the manual testers, to say, hey, these are the areas I'm not sure about. You need to do a little bit more expansive testing around it. So it depends on, startup hiring is a little bit dependent on the first candidate you get in the door that fits one of these roles. But
Mhm.
primarily, I want someone that can execute on the vision and be my proxy in all the various meetings I can't be at or I can be at.
When I interview people, I oftentimes ask, please tell me about an interesting project that you've worked on in the last year. And when a candidate just like splur technology at me, like I did this in AWS and then I built this in Java and then I built this and then and there's no why in that answer. Like, what was the problem? Why did you build it? What did you solve? And that in general is what I'm looking for. And I notice that, with seniority, oftentimes people are able to give that answer. It sounds like you're screening for that as well because you need them to understand the bigger picture so that they can be effective in the work that they do.
Exactly. Simon Sinek has a really cool video. I think he did a TED talk on this. I think he I think it's called Figure Out Your Why. And you talk through why Apple is so different, especially 20 years ago, to all the other hardware companies at the time, desktop companies at the time. They all started with the outside circle. So there's three concentric circles. There's the what, the how, and the why. And I think
Mhm.
what you just alluded to was typically in the how section, and that's kind of one of the key things I'm looking for in my team. Know your audience. So unless the person identifies as an extremely technical, curious recruiter, you want to stay at the outside circle, which is the what. and you want to stay in the why as well. So you want to be able to relate to both and not really bring up the middle circle of the how. That's for the hiring manager and the rest of the interview process. Watching that video, I think will give a good example of the why. So it's not that um, you used AWS and GCP, but really the conversation of why you picked AWS versus GCP, I think, and how you went about that um, in the recruiter screen context without bringing too much technicality into it. I
Yeah.
think that's what you were talking about, right?
Well, I try not to get in the why you used a certain tech because I don't know what the right answer is. To me, it's more what was going on in the company that you needed to make this change or you needed to build this feature. So when they talk about the project, if they don't talk about the company in the project, then I don't see them understanding what you're talking about, the vision. It definitely sounds like when you were interviewing for that role, that's something that's important to you.
It
So
is. You
let's,
really have to. I'm sorry. Yeah,
oh,
real
go
quick
ahead.
added. It is because you really have to be able to. Typically, at a startup, the testing team's small, and you really have to be able to articulate the strategy to the different stakeholders, and so that's why it's important to me.
Curious, from all of your interviewing, what percentage of QAs get that right in your interviews, would you say? Like 50%, 80%, get it right, get it wrong?
It's a large funnel. I would say it's a very large number. I don't know off the top of my head, but 70, 80% sounds about right at this point.
70 to
It's a
80%
fair.
get it right, get it wrong.
Don't give me the answer I'm looking for in the context of the why, the how, and the what. So
Okay.
they probably do know, but they're not able to articulate that in like a 2-minute response in an interview.
I want to emphasize in this conversation is how critical that being able to communicate the impact that the work that you've had in previous roles is, because like you're saying that a lot of them understand it but they're just kind of failing the interview because they don't do it for the interview, or they mess up their first 10 interviews and then they hopefully like realize it and then start doing it for future ones. So hopefully for anyone listening today that they understand how important that is. So let's get into more of what you asked in regards to technically making sure that people are right. Like we talked about making sure that people are thinking about the problems in the right space. Technically, what people are able to do in the QA space gets very complicated. I think in regards to hiring QAs, that it is the role that I find there's the most amount of mistrust going on in regards to what a resume says and what someone's actually capable of. With that mistrust, it creates dynamics in an interview process. And how do you manage that? What do you technically focus on?
Yeah, I think those are all valid points. I think the industry's done, and maybe the QA industry hasn't done enough work on this, but there's a general disservice that's done that shows in the hiring process that you described. Going back to the three different roles that I hire for, typically, you have the manual tester that's doing regression testing. They're focused on making sure things are right. That's what most people think about when they think about QA. Um, and usually there's just one title that you're hiring for, QA. But there's at least two more major roles, right? There's, I think you touched, so three, you touched on the QA automation person, whether that's uh, enveloped in the other roles or a separate hire, depending on your headcount. That person's job is to help the manual tester focus their testing. So, doing the same test over and over again has very little value. So let's automate that
Mm.
same test. And then let's allow the creativity of the manual tester to who understands the automation coverage to poke around the areas that haven't been covered. Right? So the first step is regression testing, making sure the releases are stable and we can do regression testing faster than before, and with more reliability. The second is the QA automation person, and I'm going to lump in the SDET person at this point in time because these two roles are definitely more software development type roles. The
Mhm.
quality assurance automation person is typically what I'm looking for in a person that understands scripting is the ability to take a framework that's been developed, typically by OSDET, and very quickly iterate on the coverage to make the work of manual testing lighter and allow those folks to be more creative and find the holes that we might be missing, right? So the QA person would be pretty script focused, so maybe they would be more Python, Ruby, Perl type scripter, able to get stuff going pretty quickly because that's kind of the focus. The Scrum team tester is kind of a little bit of a hybrid of both those roles. They're using existing automation coverage from the QA automation role. They're understanding the regression testing weaknesses generally, and they're using that context and those tools to help test a new feature because you have to understand the impact of a new feature on kind of the existing code base. And then you have the SDET, and they kind of are the outlier here. They're actually a development role. I look at hiring an SDET like a developer. So they need to understand architecture. They need to be able to plug into CI/CD conversations. They need to be able to look at the architecture from a long-term perspective, from a product perspective, and build frameworks that can be used by the rest of the quality team. So to answer your question, that was a little long-winded. It's really about very clearly isolating each role, each responsibility, and what the requirements are for each of those. So once you do that, and once you have, I won't go into the test pyramid, but once you have a very clear test strategy and a very clear way to abstract your test strategy, trust gets built in by default because the SDET isn't answering questions about the release process, and the person on the release, the poor manual tester, isn't answering questions to why the automation framework didn't cover the regression test this one time, but did the other 10 times. So it's about
Yeah.
delineating.
I'm curious because like I see like within hiring engineers sometimes kind of the interview process gets a little like murky, especially with front end engineers. I feel like they are put through these back end engineering interviews. You see that on the QA side that if they don't understand like the three spaces well enough, because a lot of times it is non QA people hiring QAs at early stage startups that then are they kind of mixing those three bundles and creating a unrealistic hiring process.
Yeah, often they're not even aware because, as you said, they're not quality or testing architects or strategy, folks with strategy and experience. They're often mixing all three of those roles. They often mean to hire a manual tester where they need an SDET. But then you also need to manage that because an SDET, so some, a senior developer working on architectures, you're not going to be able to see the results of that work for a little while, right? 2 or 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where you are. And releases happen. Let's just assume a 2 week scrum. Releases happen every 2 weeks, and that's where the pain is. Folks are feeling, but the source of that pain is the lack of maybe a scalable automation framework. You need the testing experience.
For the sake of time, let's just kind of shift into the AI space as we're seeing a vast majority of startups. That's where the funding is going. I'm not sure how much QA hiring is happening in that space yet, but we're going to see more and more of that. What would you recommend for people? I know we're talking about those three different groups, so I don't know how's the best way to have this conversation, but maybe there are some general recommendations that you can give in regards to how are people going to be able to go through this next tech wave with AI and be able to integrate into these companies and be successful? What do they need to be doing right now?
I hope I've given a sense. There's a lot more to a quality assurance professional than spitting out automation coverage. So that piece is actually the most, can I say, AI-able?
Yeah.
AI can provide
No,
a
I
lot
think that's a
more.
really important part of this. How much is like the job's not even going to maybe exist in 5 years because AI is just going to do it. So it's not just the
The work
AI startup, it's also what's AI going to do instead of us.
Yeah, it's almost, I think the way I'll articulate this is, there's the manual QA regression tester, there's an AI automation person, there's a Scrum team tester, there's an SDET, and now there's also an AI agent on the team. An AI agent
Mhm.
is an AI tool that will go away and do your tasks for you. You can think about it like a personal assistant. I think the workloads change now. I
Mhm.
think you still need someone to interact with the AI agent to say, hey, I need this coverage, or this coverage was missing, or we checked in code that had this coverage but didn't actually address the issue. So I think that all the layers is still necessary, but I think that they might just be squeezed into the Scrum team tester role initially. And so I think we'll hire less in the QA space and more Scrum team testers. But one fallacy that we've already gone through, at least in the testing professional space, is more automated tests are going to require less folks on the team. In actuality, you actually needed not only more folks, but you need more specialized folks, which meant it was harder to hire for. And you needed
Mhm.
folks with this kind of hybrid SDET QA automation expertise that could, your automation code now becomes a software repo, if you think about it, on its own. So it needs everything a repo needs. It needs maintenance, documentation, efficacy. It needs to be updated when features are dropped. When platform features are added, the whole thing needs to change in some ways. AI as a tool for the tester is going to be huge. We're seeing a lot of pretty cool demos of that stuff. I have not played with it myself yet, so I don't know how practical it will be over the long term. Sorry.
In talking about what people need to be learning, so should basically QAs be learning how to use the AI agents that are going to help them? Is that like what's going to give them the leg up compared to other QAs who are, I think some of us are just trying to do our job and pretend like AI is not going to be taking over it. I'm getting reached out multiple times a week about how these AI agents can do my job.
That sounds
And
helpful.
yeah, it's interesting. So is success kind of embracing those AI agents, learning how to use it so then in theory they can do more than they could have accomplished before?
I'll go back to one of the great questions you asked a little earlier, which is what do I look for at a Series ABC startup? And the thing I look for is that a person can move between one platform and one industry to another. I'm just viewing AI as like another maybe denominator here in the progress. So I think you need to, one, learn how to use it to leverage your work. So use it as a multiplier. AI agents is a testing tool. I think you need to play with the tool, have it solve some problems of your own. So use AI. There's a whole world of kind of supervised and unsupervised learning and training that you can do. You can start really shallow. You can just create an offline AI agent, Olama and LM Studio. You can run these models locally, use them, understand how they work, understand the problems that AI developers or AI researchers are going to face. And then third, both those things help you with practical experience you can refer to, experience you can conceptually translate based on your experience of working with technologies. So I think those are the three kind of areas. So use AI as a
And I
tool for
want
testing. Yep, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just want to call that out where I think there's this big difference in the market right now than I've seen before. I use React as an example. I remember like when React became like really big, it was doing hiring for front end engineers and they had to have professional React experience. If you like dabble in it as a side project, you don't get the check mark for having the React experience. But in this current AI market, if you're a software engineer, like whatever kind of technical role you have, if you are learning and using AI in side projects, you do get the check right now. But that, I believe, is only going to last for the next, I don't know, 12 to like 24 months. And then hiring is going to shift and the check mark is going to be the professional experience. So I think this is a really great opportunity in the market that regardless of your previous work experience, if you really dive into understanding AI in your space and are able to, like, you know, either whatever, build something out that you can share or just talk through it in your interview process, that it is going to have you be kind of, on the top of the players. But that is, and that's great, because it isn't all about just like you have to get the great job to then show that you're great. Like you can really take the time to grow as an individual, but this time period is short. So yeah, so I think everything that you called out in regards to what people can be doing right now is really vital to them kind of going through this next wave.
Just a quick comment on that because this is an awesome hiring recruitment podcast. I think the reason that you don't get the check mark in that React example that you described is you don't treat it like a software project. If you treat it like a software project where you have an architecture, you're following the architecture, you can articulate the architecture, you follow CI/CD principles, you show that you are, and you run your code base for a little bit, even on your own system, or ideally you have some friends use it as a tool. I think you get pretty close to the check mark. I mean, maybe that's a question for you, Isabel. How much more compelling would that be saying that I did a React side project versus I treated this like a professional project? Here it is. Um, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's hard because oftentimes it like recruiters are the first step, and we're following what the hiring managers tell us
Mhm.
and what the job description says. So if the hiring manager says I want them to have professional experience in React, then I don't know enough about like how to go from 0 to 10 in like being great at React to differentiate. And unfortunately, that there's been, for most recruiters, enough times that we give the person credit. They do a really good job of expressing that, no, 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 I do know it. I can do this. And then we send them through, and then the hiring manager rejects them. And, through going through that, and you want, as a recruiter, you want your hiring manager to trust you to be making the decisions that are going to support them. And so it's kind of like getting burned as like a recruiter. At the end of the day, you're responsible for making your hiring manager happy. And doing that is getting as many candidates in front of them that they're going to pass through. If I'm doing an amazing job as a recruiter, then when I'm sending you a candidate, 80% of the people that you talk to, you move forward. Now, achieving that is incredibly hard. Typical pass
Yeah.
through rates in interviews are about 50%, which I can't explain the logic to it. But if you have a 70% pass through rate at this stage, then at some point you're going to have under 50% pass through rate. Obviously, 50% of the people that I interview do not get hired. I don't know, that's probably more like, God, 2%. That's why I think recruiters are so sometimes inflexible. We don't want to upset the hiring managers, and we don't have that depth. You gave as a great example, but unless you're getting a hiring manager as the first call, you're not going to get that opportunity. And sometimes, like the hiring manager for roles, it's not their expertise. So I don't even know if every single hiring manager can understand that level of knowledge especially in a 30-minute call.
Finding AI meetups or technical groups that are working on AI projects and listening to those projects and understanding how, look, AI projects are the same as technology in the past. The difference is the amount of compute and the scale of the data being processed. So the problems are going to be similar. The problems are, how do we scale this? How do we make it cheaper to run? How do we make it more predictable? And how do we make it kind of future proof? We want to make a change tomorrow. Uh, so those problems actually are still the same from a scalability and a quality perspective, getting releases on time and with high quality and high predictability, right? I would sit in on as many of these meetups where people are building things and put in the back of your mind all of these standard testing challenges and draw parallels. How would I solve this scaling problem here? Um, If you leverage one of the big AI, Gen AI sort of tools like ChatGPT or Meta or Anthropic, etc., there's a lot of API communication. There's a lot of speed. There's varying responses. How do you test those things? Those aren't new problems per se, but they're definitely new problems at this scale. So I think sitting in on a project, sitting in on a meetup, finding some technical group that's building something, and helping them, even with strategy, just asking questions. Hey, have you thought about this? This is what I've seen from this e-commerce space, or in robotics. This is where this thing breaks, or in healthcare, PII is important. Applying your experience practically. So I would say that's the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit. The others are, find some courses, get hands-on, solve a problem for yourself. Um, yeah, those are, I think, the two things on the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. I obviously appreciate you so much for coming on and talking about this. Include its LinkedIn profiles. What would be good things for people to reach out to you about if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, if you're a CTO or a VP of Eng and you can't quite hire a QA team or an experienced QA, I'm more than happy to have a chat and help you figure out what a quick strategy is for the testing piece and
Mm-hmm.
how it might fit. So that's one. I love mentoring folks, all experiences. So if you're a developer and you want to learn more of the testing space, and you mentioned some of the poor exchanges between kind of those groups in the past, I am more than happy to provide context. If you're a QA, an SDAT, and you want to talk through ideas, more than happy to talk through that. And depending on the volume of messages, you might have to wait a little.
Yeah, and I will say, Elliot's always been there for me as a friend, and I'm, always so grateful for the advice that you've given me over the years. And I feel like I've learned so much more about QA hiring just from having this conversation with you. So I'm grateful for that. So, all
Thanks.
right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.